The moment I understood what had just happened to me, I was standing in a hotel hallway in Atlanta in a ruined suit, and my son-in-law was laughing. Not quietly, not embarrassed. Laughing like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment and couldn't believe how perfectly it had arrived. His voice cut through the noise of that ballroom like something meant to wound. "Everybody look," he called out, loud enough that heads turned from 3 different table clusters. 68 years old and he can't even make it to the men's room. I stood there, frozen. The worst part wasn't the smell. It wasn't the wet heat running down my legs. It wasn't even the fact that I could see my daughter's face going white across the room. The worst part was the realization, slow and cold and absolutely certain, that this had not been an accident, and that the man standing there pointing at me, grinning while people laughed, had no idea that 3 days ago I had become his boss. I want to be honest with you before I go any further. I almost didn't tell this story. Not because I'm ashamed of what happened, I'm past that now, but because telling it means walking back through the years before that night, and those years were some of the loneliest of my life. My name is Walter. I'm 68 years old. I live in Atlanta, and the man who humiliated me in front of 200 people at the Grand Peachtree Ballroom was my son-in-law, Marcus. I need you to understand who Marcus was before you understand what I did about it. My daughter Celeste met Marcus at 29, 5 years after her mother passed. She was ready to love someone, and he was ready to be loved by someone like her, someone patient and generous and willing to work hard at something she believed in. I tried to be glad for her. I tried harder than she will ever know. Marcus was charming the way certain tools are sharp. Precise, useful in the right hands, dangerous in the wrong ones. He had a handsome face and a quick mouth and the kind of confidence that reads as competence until you've known someone long enough to see the difference. From the very first dinner, Celeste brought him to a Sunday meal at the house I'd lived in for 31 years. He looked around at my bookshelves and my old leather furniture and my framed photographs, and I watched something move behind his eyes. Not admiration. Calculation. The first year, the comments were small enough to dismiss. "Mr. Walter, you should probably let Celeste handle the maps on the phone. GPS is complicated if you're not used to it." Or, "Celeste was telling me you've been forgetting appointments." That can be an early sign of something worth getting checked out. Each one delivered with a slight tilt of concern, each one landing exactly where it was aimed. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, not with hatred, but with something worse, with dismissal, where you could feel yourself being reclassified from person to problem, from presence to inconvenience? That is what those years with Marcus felt like. A slow reclassification, not dramatic enough to fight, not obvious enough to name. Just persistent, quiet erosion. The worst incident before the dinner happened at Christmas. I had spent 2 days preparing the meal my late wife Donna had made every year for 30 years. Her sweet potato recipe, her cornbread dressing, her slow-cooked greens. Celeste confirmed 3 separate times that she and Marcus were coming. I bought too much food on purpose, the way I always did, because a full table felt like hope. Christmas morning, she called to cancel. Marcus had a fever. She was sorry. 3 days later, I ran into a woman named Bernadette from Celeste's old neighborhood at the Kroger on Peachtree Road. Bernadette mentioned seeing them at the Midtown Holiday Market that same day, laughing, perfectly healthy, walking with what appeared to be Marcus's entire family. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I was past tears by then. What I felt was something quieter and more permanent, the kind of understanding that changes how you see a situation forever. Marcus was not confused or careless or occasionally thoughtless. He was deliberate. He was working towards something. What I didn't yet understand was what, exactly, he was working toward. That answer came 8 months before the dinner, on a Saturday afternoon when I arrived at Celeste's house, unannounced, something I had stopped doing, after Marcus made it clear that drop-ins were stressful for Celeste. I had a legitimate reason. I was dropping off a piece of jewelry that had been Donna's, something Celeste had asked me about twice. I was about to knock when I heard Marcus through the open kitchen window, on the phone, talking in the easy way people talk when they believe they cannot be overheard. "It's just a matter of time," he said, laughing softly. "Once I get the doctors involved, get a couple of assessments on record, the competency thing almost handles itself. The house alone is worth $500,000. Between that and the retirement accounts." I stood on that porch and felt the ground shift under me. He was not simply trying to push me out of Celeste's life. He was planning to have me declared legally incompetent so he could gain control of everything I had built. Every suggestion that I was forgetting things. Every manufactured concern about my ability to live alone. Every Christmas canceled and every phone call cut short, it was infrastructure. He was building a case. I walked back to my car. I drove home. And I sat in the kitchen where Donna and I had eaten 10,000 breakfasts together, and I made a decision that I have never once regretted. If Marcus wanted to come for what I had built, I was going to build something he could never take. Now here is where I should tell you something that surprises most people. I was not always just Celeste's aging father living alone in a big house in Atlanta. For 22 years, I ran a mid-sized manufacturing company called Morrison Industrial. I built it from a 1,200 square foot shop with 4 employees into an operation that employed over 300 people at its peak. I sold it in 2008 for a number I had never told Marcus or Celeste, or frankly anyone outside of my accountant and my attorney. What I told people was that I had done fine. What fine actually looked like was closer to 9 figures on a careful decades-long balance sheet that I had never once stopped managing. I was not confused. I was not declining. I had simply gotten quiet. The company I had been watching was called Garrison & Webb, a regional logistics and supply firm headquartered in Buckhead, in the kind of glass building that looks expensive from the street. Marcus had worked there for 2 years as an operations coordinator, mid-level, the kind of position that sounds important at dinner parties and pays $61,000 a year. Celeste worked there too, in marketing, genuinely talented, genuinely underpaid. I had been watching Garrison & Webb for 6 months before the dinner. The founder, a man named Earl Garrison, was 74 and exhausted in the particular way that men get when they have run something alone for too long. His children had no interest in the business. His second-in-command had just retired. The company was profitable but stagnant, losing ground to competitors who moved faster and thought harder. Earl and I had a mutual contact, a man named Reginald from my manufacturing days, who vouched for me the way old men vouch for each other, with specificity and without flattery. Our first lunch was at a quiet restaurant in Virginia Highland, far from the Buckhead offices. Earl shook my hand the way I knew he would, the grip of someone who had made things with his hands before he made them with capital. Within 40 minutes, we understood each other. "What I don't want," Earl said, "is to sell this to someone who sees my people as line items." "Then we want the same thing," I told him. The negotiation took 4 months. It was not complicated once trust was established. I purchased 53% controlling interest for a price I will not specify, but which Earl considered fair and which I considered an investment in something more than business. The paperwork closed on a Thursday afternoon in an attorney's office in Midtown. The dinner was that Saturday. I have asked myself many times since then whether what Marcus did that night was connected, whether he somehow found out, whether it was a preemptive strike, whether it was panic dressed up as cruelty. I have never found evidence of that. I believe now that it was simpler. I believe he had been planning some version of that night for months, looking for the right public moment to cement a specific image of me in the minds of people who mattered to Celeste's career. An image of a man who was failing, a man who needed to be managed. He put something in my food. I know this the way I know most things, not from proof I could take to a courtroom, but from the accumulation of timing and motive and the particular satisfaction on his face when the cramps began. 40 minutes after I ate the plate he had personally selected and carried to me, my body staged a revolt I could not control. And Marcus, who had positioned himself perfectly, watched it happen. The hallway outside the ballroom of the Grand Peachtree, 200 colleagues and family members, his voice carrying across all of it. I want to slow this moment down for you because I think it deserves to be felt fully. I was standing in a hotel hallway in a city I love, wearing the navy blazer I had put on that evening because I wanted to look appropriate for my daughter's professional world. My late wife Donna had bought me that blazer. I was 68 years old. I had buried my wife. I had built and sold a company. I had raised a daughter alone after her mother died. I had survived things that Marcus, at 36, had not yet been asked to survive. And I stood there, and I felt everything, and I did not fall. That matters. I need you to know that. Celeste came to me immediately, her face carrying every complicated thing at once: love, horror, embarrassment, grief. She took me home. Marcus stayed behind to handle what he called the social situation, which told me everything I needed to know about what his primary concern was in that moment. The drive was quiet. Celeste suggested I see a doctor. I nodded. What I was actually doing was beginning to plan. On Monday morning, I arrived at Garrison & Webb at 8:45. Earl had arranged for me to be introduced as a senior strategic consultant, a title ambiguous enough to explain my presence without revealing my ownership, which we had agreed to disclose gradually to protect operational stability. My office was on the 4th floor. From my window, I could see the open-plan floor where Marcus sat with his colleagues in operations. He was leaning back in his chair with his feet on his desk, talking on his personal phone. I spent the first week reading everything: performance reviews, HR records, internal communications flagged by Earl's assistant before she retired. What I found was not surprising, but it was useful. Marcus had 3 formal warnings in his file for what his supervisor, a woman named Diane, described as disruptive workplace behavior and inappropriate commentary regarding senior colleagues. He had been recommended for termination twice. The only reason he remained was institutional inertia and a HR department that preferred documentation to confrontation. In the break room on Wednesday, I listened to Marcus hold court for a group of 3 younger associates. He was funny, I will give him that. He knew how to read a room, how to time a joke, how to make people feel included in his opinion. He was saying that the real problem with companies like this one was that leadership kept mistaking longevity for value. Being here for 20 years doesn't mean you understand the business, he said. It just means you haven't found anything better yet. I took a long sip of my coffee. He had no idea. Honestly, if that had been me at that table, I don't know if I could have stayed quiet. I think about that moment often. There is something about watching a man construct his own downfall with such confidence, such complete absence of doubt, that produces a specific feeling, not quite anger, not quite satisfaction, something more like grief for all the time he had spent going the wrong direction without anyone willing to tell him. By the end of my first 2 weeks, I had a complete picture. I had documented his performance issues with specificity, corroborated by colleagues across 3 departments. I had spoken with Diane, who had been trying to address his conduct for over a year. I had spoken with 6 employees who described a working environment that felt increasingly hostile to anyone over 45. I had everything I needed. I asked Patricia, Earl's longtime executive assistant who had agreed to stay on through the transition, to schedule a mandatory company-wide meeting for Friday afternoon at 3:30. The official subject line: Introduction to New Company Leadership. I want to tell you what the room looked like when I walked to the front of it. 212 employees, round tables, the kind of fluorescent afternoon light that makes everything feel slightly too real. Earl was in the front row, Diane was near the middle. Marcus was in the back, arms crossed, visibly annoyed at having his Friday afternoon interrupted, his phone face down on the table in front of him. Earl spoke first, briefly, the way founders speak when they are passing something they love to someone they trust. Then he said my name and I stood up. I want you to picture this moment. The man who had stood in a hotel hallway 3 weeks ago in a ruined blazer, pointed at, laughed at, dismissed that man is now standing at the front of this room. And the man who did the pointing is sitting in the back, and his face is changing. I can see it from here. The boredom is falling away. Something else is moving in. I spoke slowly. I have learned over many years that the people who speak most slowly in a room are usually the ones who feel most certain about what they are saying. I thanked the team for their patience during the transition. I said that in my weeks of observation I had been genuinely impressed by the commitment of the vast majority of the workforce. I said the word vast majority with deliberate care, and I watched several people in the room recalibrate. Then I said that we would be conducting a full review of workplace culture, with particular attention to how experienced employees were treated, and how professionalism was being modeled by those in mid-level positions. The room was quiet. I said that I had been present at the company's recent corporate dinner, that I had witnessed something there that was inconsistent with the values this company would hold going forward. That public cruelty toward any colleague or toward any person was not a cultural quirk to be overlooked. It was a character statement. And going forward, character would have consequences here. I paused. No one moved. I dismissed the room and asked department heads to remain. Marcus did not leave. He sat in his chair while everyone else filed out. And he looked at me the way a man looks when the architecture of his entire life is rearranging itself in real time. When the room was empty, he came toward me. His swagger was gone. Something younger and more frightened had taken its place. And for just one moment, I felt the complicated thing that I imagine most people feel in this situation. Not triumph. Something more like sorrow for everything that had brought us both to this room. Mr. Walter, he said. His voice was careful. I didn't know who you were. I know that, I said. I want to explain about the dinner. You don't need to explain, I said. I know what you did. And I think somewhere you know that I know. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. I set a folder on the table between us. I told him it contained 18 months of documented performance issues, corroborated complaints from 9 colleagues, and 3 formal termination recommendations from his direct supervisor. I told him that his employment with Garrison and Webb was ending today, effective immediately, with a severance package that was fair and a non-disclosure agreement that was non-negotiable. I'll fight this, he said, but it came out thin. He knew it too. On what basis? I asked quietly. The documentation here is thorough. The witnesses are willing. And you've been on record making age-discriminatory remarks, which means any retaliation claim you file puts you in the precise legal position you were planning to put me in. He understood. Before he left, he said he was sorry. And I want to be honest with you, I believed him. Not because he was a good man, but because in that moment he was a frightened one, and frightened people sometimes tell the truth. I told him I hoped he would carry this forward. I told him that the older people he had dismissed had not arrived at their experience without cost. That what he called irrelevance, most people call survival. He walked out. Security escorted him to his desk. That evening, Celeste called. Her voice was tight with the specific kind of anger that comes from hurt. Marcus had told her his version on the drive home. I asked her to come over. She sat across from me on the couch in the living room where I had raised her, and I showed her everything. Not angrily. Not with satisfaction. I showed her the recordings I had made in the office. I showed her the HR file. I showed her the transcript of the conversation I had overheard through that kitchen window 8 months ago, the one about competency proceedings in the house on Cascade Road. The moment she understood what that conversation meant, she went completely still. I have seen my daughter cry at 4 distinct points in her life. When her mother died. When her first serious relationship ended. When she got the job at Garrison and Webb and called me from the parking lot shaking with relief. And that night on my couch, when she realized that the man she had chosen had been planning for years to take everything her father had built while convincing her that her father was fading. I didn't say anything. I put my arm around her. She's 40 years old and she felt, in that moment, like she was 9. I canceled Christmas, she said quietly, after a long time. I let him cancel Christmas on you. You're here now, I said. This story taught me something I want to leave with you. I spent too many years believing that enduring quietly was the same as responding wisely. It is not. There is a version of patience that is dignity, and there is a version of patience that is surrender. I had been practicing the second one and calling it the first. What changed me was not the humiliation in that hotel hallway. I could have survived that. What changed me was standing on my daughter's porch and hearing a man price out my irrelevance. The mistake most people make when they are being systematically diminished is to keep trying to prove their worth to the person who has decided they have none. You cannot win that argument. You can only build something that makes the argument irrelevant. If you have ever been made to feel like your age, your experience, your history was something to apologize for, I want you to know that what was done to you was a lie told by someone who needed you to be smaller so they could feel larger. You were not shrinking. You were being shrunk. Those are not the same thing. The specific action I would ask you to consider today is this. Make a list of what you have actually built. Not what you currently possess, but what you have built, relationships endured, skills accumulated, losses survived, things created from nothing. Read it when someone tries to convince you it amounts to nothing. It will not feel like a magic cure. But it is true. And truth has a kind of weight that lies can never quite match. The question I would leave with you is this. Who in your life has been quietly, systematically telling you that your best days are behind you? And what have you done with that information? Celeste joined Garrison and Webb 6 months after Marcus left. She is now our head of marketing. She is exceptionally good at it. We have lunch on Thursdays, at the same diner where her mother and I used to take her on Sunday mornings when she was small, and we talk the way I always hoped we would talk, honestly, without performance, without the low-grade anxiety of a third person managing the narrative between us. At the company's first annual celebration under my ownership, I stood at a podium in a room full of people who had chosen to stay through a leadership transition and build something together, and I thought about the navy blazer that is still in my closet, still carrying everything that night held. I keep it there on purpose. Not as a reminder of shame, as a reminder of what came next. Before I go, I want to ask you something directly. If you were in my position, if you had been publicly humiliated by someone you had tried to accept and respect, would you have done what I did? Would you have waited? Would you have planned? Or would the anger have moved faster than the wisdom? Drop a 1 inch the comments if you think I handled it right. Drop a 2 if you think I should have moved sooner. Drop a 3 if honestly, you're not sure, because sometimes the most honest answer is the complicated one. And tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is where you are. I think about the people who find these stories in the middle of the night when something is sitting heavy, and I want you to know that wherever you are, this story was told for you. If something in here felt familiar, if you recognize something about the slow, quiet way a person can be made to feel like a burden in their own life, I hope you'll share this with someone who needs to hear it. If this channel has ever given you something worth keeping, a subscription means you'll be here for the next one. I'm going to keep telling stories that matter. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.